To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Now the old king is dead, long live the king. 1 minute I held the key. Next the walls were closed on me, and I discovered that my castle stand upon pillars of salt and pillars of sand.
On June 17th, Frank Wills, a security guard at the Watergate Hotel, is watching over the Democratic National Committee headquarters. He notices a piece of tape on the door to the office that is keeping it unlocked. He calls the police. At midnight, 5 burglars broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters and wired the phones, making it possible for them to hear the things being said on that room. They want news on the election, it seems. Because President Richard Nixon is looking to be re-elected for the Republican Party, people begin to question him after the 5 men are arrested. Young reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward of the Washington Post were chosen to investigate the break-in. This was how they were first introduced to the Watergate scandal. They stuck with the story. Less than 4 months later, Nixon won the election in a landslide, winning 49 states. No one seemed surprised, but Bernstein and Woodward thought it was suspicious and investigated further to find out if the break-in at Watergate had anything to do with Nixon's huge win. Other newspapers and news channels did not look twice at the story. However, Bob Woodward was beginning to have his suspicions. It turns out he was right. At the hotel room of one of the burglars, a ledger and a check was found, both referencing Howard Hunt, which was abbreviated HH. Next to it were also the letters WH, which was found out to mean White House. Bob Woodward contacted the White House and discovered that Howard Hunt used to work there. Woodward tracked him down with the help of Bernstein. They later discovered that one of the burglars, James McCord, was working at the White House and was in fact on the committee to re-elect President Nixon. The Washington Post then comes out with yet another front-page article on a story no one dared to touch.
Well, we were the local paper. We had great editors who were curious about, well, what was this about a break-in into the Democratic headquarters? The clues were quite substantial, and that Carl Bernstein and I were young, unmarried, and they turned us loose on it, and quite frankly, I think it was the culture of the Washington Post at the time, and continues to be that culture of we have a responsibility to dig into things.
The story begins to grow with the 2 reporters digging as deep as they can. It seems like Nixon was paying people off in order to get re-elected, but many refused to believe this. The 2 needed more evidence if they were going to accuse the president. Luckily, Woodward met a mysterious source, and his information became crucial to Watergate. This source told the reporter to follow the money in order to study Nixon's dealings. This source was nicknamed Deep Throat. This is one of the most unlikely places to bring down a president: a parking garage. It was here that Bob Woodward met with Deep Throat, discovered to be an FBI agent, and was given information on who to follow, where to look, and overall information the Washington Post desperately needed in order to give the story its credibility. It was in the parking garage, when he had to take 2 cabs and wait in the darkness at Arlington, Virginia, Woodward met with this mysterious person, whom only he knew the identity of for over 30 years. Woodward and Bernstein had to trust this source, but they knew the cost if he turned out to be unreliable. Still, they had the responsibility to let the public know what was going on in their government.
Well, I knew his position, and that he was the one who was in the FBI, would know what their investigation was, that he did work for the White House. I had met him in the White House when I was in the Navy, and so his position, I think, was the chief reason. The second reason was he was so cautious. He wasn't somebody to say, oh yeah, this is outrageous. He would say, look, this is what I understand.
More and more people were beginning to see the evidence, thanks to the Washington Post, and more articles came out, some from different newspapers, and the public realized that something needed to be done. The tapes were key. Many of Nixon's illegal transactions were done in the White House, and Nixon taped all of them.
Who knows? He knew that Johnson had taped some phone calls, that Kennedy had taped some phone calls. So I don't know why he decided. I assume he had a gigantic ego. I assume it's because he wanted to be able, in his memoirs, know what everybody was saying to him all the time. But it certainly was a strange thing to do.
However, Richard Nixon refused to release the tapes to the public. The Saturday Night Massacre was the term that was given to the night when Richard Nixon began to panic, and he decided he needed to fire Watergate Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, who had insisted he release the tapes. Nixon then ordered the Attorney General Elliot Richardson to fire him. Richardson, however, agreed with Cox and refused to fire him. He then resigned in protest. Nixon then ordered the next in line Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus to dismiss Archibald Cox. That same night, Ruckelshaus refused and resigned. The public wanted Nixon out of office. The protests just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. A huge number of political cartoons were made, which caused even more people to be informed. The story had got out that the president had abused his rights, and that it was the public and the press's responsibility to spread the word. In 1974, the Congress representatives started a campaign in order to get President Nixon impeached, or accused of a crime and then removed from his job. Nixon's lawyers desperately tried to defend him, but the press, the public, and the Congress's voices were too loud. Finally, on August 5th, Nixon released the tapes and their transcripts. They revealed that Nixon had been lying to the American people and that he had paid off many people to get elected, and even more people to cover it up. 4 days later, Nixon stood on his podium and announced to the American people that he would resign the presidency.
On the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
The Washington Post had the responsibility to take action and to write about the scandal, even though it seemed risky and unbelievable. Once the public heard Nixon's own voice incriminating himself, public opinion became galvanized. Nixon had to go. The Watergate scandal shows just how important it is to have a press that is willing to make sure the people are well informed.
One of the big long-term impacts of Nixon's scandal in the White House was this huge government reform ethics package and legislation, and it was considered a way to make government more honest by disclosing more what government officials were doing.
But that's the job of the newspaper. Now, Katharine Graham, who was the publisher and owner of the Post at the time, told us, look, because we believe this, because it's denied so strongly, we have a responsibility, maybe a triple, quadruple responsibility to dig into it. Because it involved the President of the United States, that gave us a greater responsibility.
So the country was relieved, shocked that this had happened, and relieved that it had been resolved in a peaceable, in an orderly fashion. It was a reinforcement of American democratic institutions.
The U.S. Constitution gives the press the right to freedom of speech. The press has the right to question authority in a responsible manner. The different branches of our government hold each other accountable, and the press is part of that system of checks and balances. And it was during Watergate, for the first time in the history of America, that the press found itself in a face-off with the executive office. The press offered the Watergate facts to the public, and the public, the press, the Congress, and the Constitution collectively held the president responsible for his actions. We had a right to know the truth. It is everyone's responsibility.
Feel the earth move and then hear my heart burn.